The helicopter sliced through the thick, humid air of the jungle, the rhythmic thumping of its rotors a familiar heartbeat to the men crouched inside. For the 8 Navy SEALs of SEAL Team 3, this was just another insertion, another high-value target, another night. Lieutenant Commander Jason "Jace" Brandt, a man with a granite jaw and eyes that had seen too much, ran through the mission parameters in his head for the 100th time. The objective was a fortified al-Qaeda camp deep in the Shah-e-Khat Valley. Their intel was solid. A high-ranking facilitator was meeting with cell leaders. The camp was bristling with anti-aircraft weaponry and at least 50 hostiles. It was a hornet's nest, and they were about to kick it. But there was a variable in the equation that made Jace's stomach churn more than the usual pre-mission jitters. Strapped into the jump seat across from him was someone who didn't fit the mold. Petty Officer First Class Maya Reyes. She wasn't a SEAL. She was a sniper. The best the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, or DevGru, had ever seen, according to the scuttlebutt. She was also, as Jace's spotter had whispered with a smirk, 120 pounds of trouble for the other side? With her dark hair pulled back tight and her sharp, focused gaze fixed on the M40A5 sniper rifle cradled in her lap, she looked less like a soldier and more like a university student engrossed in a textbook. Jace had argued against her inclusion on this op. Not because she was a woman, he told himself, but because this was a direct action mission. A violent close-quarters brawl. Snipers were support. They were Overwatch. They weren't supposed to be in the belly of the beast. The commander had overruled him. We need her eyes, Jace, and her trigger. The intel says they have a DSHK heavy machine gun on the North Ridge. That gun needs to be silent before we can land the main force. She's the only one who can make that shot from the LZ. The helicopter banked hard, the signal they were nearing the landing zone. Jace gave the hand signal and his men checked their gear for the 100th time. Mike Tex Harrison, the team's massive communicator, patted the satchel on his hip. Tommy Preach Campbell, the medic, whispered a silent prayer. Tony Mac Machado, the point man with a restless energy, cracked his knuckles. They were the tip of the spear, and they were ready. Then, the world turned to fire. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the helicopter's tail rotor. The aircraft lurched violently, sirens blaring. The pilots fought for control, but it was a losing battle. The last thing Jace saw before the impact was Maya Reyes's face. There was no fear, no panic. Just a strange, intense calm as she braced herself. The helicopter hit the ground hard, cartwheeling through the trees in a storm of twisting metal and shredded vegetation. The crash was a cacophony of screams, grinding metal and exploding fuel. When the world finally stopped spinning, Jace was hanging upside down, his harness the only thing holding him in place. The helicopter was in 2 pieces. The cabin was filled with smoke and the smell of aviation fuel. Men were groaning. Some weren't moving. "Sound off! Sound off!" Jace yelled, and his voice hoarse. One by one, the SEALs called out. Tex was there, bleeding from a gash on his head. Preach was already moving, checking pulses. Mac was struggling to free his leg. They were missing 2 men, the pilots and the sniper. They had to move. The crash would have been seen and heard for miles. The enemy would be converging on their position within minutes. As they cut themselves free and dragged the wounded pilots from the wreckage, Jace saw her. Maya was crouched 20 meters away, already in a prone position behind a fallen log, her sniper rifle aimed up at the ridge. She had a deep cut on her arm, but she seemed oblivious to it. Her eye was pressed to the scope. "Reyes! We have to move! Now!" Jace shouted, his voice cutting through the smoke. She didn't look at him. "They're already here, Lieutenant," she said, so her voice unnervingly calm. "I have 17 tangos moving down the eastern slope. They'll be in firing range in 60 seconds. Jace's blood ran cold. He looked at his team. They were battered, disoriented, and out in the open with no cover. The radio was fried. Their extraction was hours away, and that was only if anyone even knew they were down. He looked back at the ridge and could just make out the dark shapes moving through the trees. It wasn't 17. It was more. Much more. It looked like the entire camp was descending on them. He had lost the element of surprise. He had lost his team's mobility, and now he was about to lose his men's lives. The DSK heavy machine gun they were supposed to take out was suddenly a moot point. They were fighting for immediate survival. "Tex, I'd find me a spot with any kind of cover," Jace ordered, his mind racing through a dozen failed tactical scenarios. There was no good option. They were fish in a barrel. "There's a depression about 40 yards back, Lieutenant, but it's not much," Tex reported, pointing. "Preach, get the pilots moving. Mac, help him," Jace commanded. "I'll lay down suppressing fire." He turned to Maya. "Reyes, you're with me. We'll buy them time to get to cover and then fall back." But Maya hadn't moved. She was still staring through her scope, her breathing slow and rhythmic. "I can stop them," she said, so quietly Jace almost didn't hear her. "Stop them? With what? A prayer? There's 50 of them, Reyes. We need to move." "No," she said, and there was a finality in her voice that gave Jace pause. "I can stop them. Right here. But I need you to spot for me. I need a count. I need to be fast." Jace looked at the advancing line of insurgents. They were spreading out, moving with the confidence of hunters who had cornered their prey. They were shouting to each other, their voices carrying on the night air. He looked at his men, struggling to drag the wounded pilots through the thick undergrowth. He looked at this slight woman lying in the dirt, her face streaked with grime and blood, calmly making the most audacious claim he had ever heard. He didn't have time to argue. He didn't have time to think. He just reacted. He dropped to his knees beside her, pulling out his binoculars. "You're crazy," he muttered. "Probably," she replied. "Target 1, bearing 285, the one with the RPK. He's the biggest threat." Jace put the glasses on the man. He was 300 yards out, and yelling orders, waving his weapon. "Got him!" The crack of the M40 was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. Through the binoculars, Jace saw the man crumple. "Target 2, Maya said, her voice still a monotone. "Bearing 282, the one pointing at the wreckage." Crack. Another insurgent dropped. "Target 3, bearing 279, the one with the radio." Crack. Down. Jace's jaw dropped. He had seen shooting. He had seen incredible shooting. But this was something else. There was no pause, no adjustment, no wasted motion. It was as if she had a direct line from her brain to the trigger, and the bullet was just an extension of her will. "Target 4, bearing 275, moving right to left." Crack. The man went down mid-stride. "Target 5, bearing 272, behind the rock." Crack. A puff of dust from the rock. And the insurgent slumped forward. Jace stopped counting. He just started calling out bearings as fast as she could fire. The rhythm was hypnotic. Crack. A man falls. Crack. A man falls. The insurgents on the slope were slowing, confused. Their leaders were dropping one after another with no visible source of fire. They started to scramble for cover, but it didn't matter. Maya's bullets found them behind rocks, behind trees. In the split second, they popped up to see what was happening. It wasn't just marksmanship. It was a kind of malevolent magic. She was painting a masterpiece of destruction with every round. "Bearing 265, the one with the PKM machine gun," Jace said, his voice now filled with a kind of awed reverence. Crack. The machine gunner fell, his weapon clattering down the slope. Jace glanced at his watch. It had been maybe 7 seconds. He looked back at the ridge. The slope was littered with bodies. He tried to count, but they were everywhere. The remaining insurgents, those who were still standing, had stopped advancing. They were frozen, looking at their dead comrades, their faces masks of terror. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they broke. They turned and ran, scrambling back up the slope, desperate to get away from the invisible angel of death that haunted that valley. The sudden silence that followed was more deafening than the gunfire. The only sounds were the crackling of the burning helicopter and the labored breathing of the SEALs who had made it to the depression. Maya finally lifted her eye from the scope. She slowly scanned the ridge one last time, ensuring the threat was gone. Then, she calmly ejected the empty magazine, slapped a new one in, and looked at Jace. Her face was pale under the grime, and her hands were shaking almost imperceptibly. The superhuman focus was gone, replaced by the face of a young woman who had just done something impossible. "I had 25, she said, her voice quiet. "Confirm that later, though. Could have been a few more." Jace just stared at her, his mouth open. He looked back at the slope, littered with the evidence of her skill. 25 targets in 10 seconds. He had been a SEAL for 15 years. He had led men into the hottest combat zones on Earth. He had never, ever seen anything like it. The panic that had gripped him just moments ago was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. They were going to live. Later, after the QRF had arrived, after the debriefings, but after the commander had listened to Jace's report with an expression of pure disbelief, Jace found her sitting alone on a crate, staring out at the dark mountains. He walked over and stood beside her for a long moment. "I owe you an apology," he said, the words rough in his throat. "I didn't want you on this op. I was wrong." Maya didn't look at him. "You weren't wrong, Lieutenant. You just didn't know me." She paused, her gaze still fixed on the distance. "My father taught me to shoot when I was 5. He said the world would always try to tell me I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. He said the only way to prove them wrong was to be so good they couldn't ignore me." She finally turned to look at him, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "I guess I just wanted to be unignorable." Jace nodded slowly. "Mission accomplished," he said softly. And for the first time that night, Maya Reyes's smile reached her eyes. She had been the variable, the outlier, the one who didn't fit. And she had saved them all.